My name is Gordon Greene, and I am the abbot for Chosei Zen, which is that's the umbrella under which all of us are training in all the different dojos where we exist. And I live at Spring Green Dojo, southwestern Wisconsin, out in the woods. This is where we hold Wisconsin sesshin and special training kind of events. Uh, and I hope every one of you at some point gets a chance to come visit. Among other things, we've just started creation of a new Kyudo dojo, thanks to Anita and her leadership, who did major excavation on Friday. We've got a little bit more to do this week, but there's always something here in the woods that's good to be part of. So I'm occasionally look at a clock, but it's just one, my time, and we've got some time together. Those of you who know me, I'm a really slow learner, very slow. But I'm also kind of relentless. That it just never stops. I don't want it to stop. And one of the delights of teaching is that teaching is one of the best ways I have for learning. So today is just a chance, it's just sort of an ongoing sharing of things that I'm learning. And I'm just back from Hawaii, a place I have lived, a place I have been. I can't tell you how many times since my first visit was 1972, so over 50 years ago. But some new things happened with this trip that I want to share with you. It's sort of it's another element of our Zen training that I've recently become much more aware of. And I want to develop it and create training opportunities for any of you, any of our students, because of a recognition for me how significant they have been. And I thought I would serve us all best today is by telling you about four people I think you should know. Two of them are dead, so you'll have to do some work to learn about them. Two of them are still living. I just was with them. And each of them sort of has a different light they can show on this part of our training that I want to talk about. And I'm not sure why. This this may not be relevant. I don't know. But as I was prepping this, and I'm making my notes, and then I throw those out, and I do a fresh draft and everything. The note I put right at the top, where I am at the moment, was to tell you a story from when I was a medical educator at the medical school in Hawaii. And one of the delights of teaching there was the students who came from such wonderfully varied backgrounds. It was as cross-cultural a setting as I've ever been in. And we did a lot of time in their third year of training, sort of helping them reflect on patients they were seeing and lessons learned from patients they were seeing. And one memorable moment was a description from a young med student talking about a Native Hawaiian man she had seen in clinic. This is outpatient, who was there to evaluate sort of his ongoing diabetes. And if you've ever been around medical students, oh, they are just the eagerest of beavers when it comes to reading and knowing and analyzing, what's the why is this happening, and what do we know about treatment, and how should this go? And they're just full of knowledge and advice. So here is this young medical student just ready to unload on this guy, trying to check in on what he was doing and how he was taking care of himself. Was he following his medications? Was he following the advice from his doctor? And the answer was just a very comfortable no, no. And so this caught the med student short. Why? Why in the face of this suffering? Well, let me just back up a minute. I'm not a clinician, but my understanding is that as diabetes progresses, it alters the nerves in your lower legs, and it makes it. There can be both pain, there can be a lot of deterioration that happens. It's not a pleasant experience as it keeps progressing. So two things from this encounter. She was asking why is this, not something that you care to follow the advice, follow the medications, follow what we know is best. And the answer was that, well, he watched his father would suffer from the same diabetes. And he felt that it would disrespect his father if he were to try and treat it, because his father didn't. And so if his father endured this, then so must he. And it just was said in an even way. So the student next asked a very wise question. She asked, what's the hardest thing for you? What's the most difficult thing for you in living as you are with this diabetes? And he said, I can't feel the ground. And this is where it gets a little bit tough. There's a phrase in Hawaiian, kamaaina, which means someone of the land. And you can, I think, in an English language, there's sort of an honorific, there's sort of a, there's something to that. But to a native Hawaiian, it's literal. It's not an honorific. It means that it's very hard to separate your body from the ground you walk on, the waters you swim in. I mean, literally joined. So to have that connection broken was the hardest thing for this man. He couldn't feel the ground. And then they could progress. They could carry on the conversation and start to get into what that was like for him. But I guess the reason this came to me as a thought was that what I was posing for myself in figuring out this talk was sort of a phrase that I've used in the past talking about Zen. And I've said that, to answer what is Zen, I've said it's an assault on duality, right? And that's sort of the nature of the training, the early days of my training that I went to. very physical, aggressive, um, a struggle, a fight, a battle. But in many ways, that never really matches my character. And the flip side of an assault on duality is the healing of duality. And I think that's why I'm thinking about this man with the diabetes, healing the duality between you and the ground you stand on, you and someone else. And it's come, I've sort of held fragments of this in me for many, many years as a teacher, but I hadn't quite fully appreciated how our training comes alive with both elements, the yin and the yang. It's an assault on duality and it's a healing of duality. And those were embedded in my teacher, Tanoi Roshi, but in ways that weren't always clear. And I've talked about this before. I talked about this during Keishin. I'm not going to go back over that. But this healing of duality is really brought out in Native Hawaiian spirituality. And so one of the purposes of my trip was to see to what degree we could start developing opportunities for students to experience Native Hawaiian spirituality in the way that I did. And by the time I end today, I hope you'll understand a little bit of how intimately connected with our Zen training this is. So, Poka La'inui. Poka La'inui is a man still living. I wish every one of you could just spend time sitting and talking with. He lives deep, 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 deep up a valley on the Waianae coast of Oahu. His house I would describe as pretty bust up. It keeps the rain off, but I don't know much of what else it does. But that's been his home for 70 years. It was his father's home. Now it's his home. And Poka is a lawyer by training. And I won't go into the history of this whatsoever, but he is a ferocious, tenacious, relentless advocate for Hawaiian sovereignty, a restoration of Hawaii as a sovereign nation. To the extent that he has done extensive work at the UN, both in New York and in Europe. He has led the UN Commission on Rights of Indigenous Peoples. He is a man of great international recognition. But before he's even a lawyer, he is someone who, he calls it deep culture. He likes to know the ground out of which people's behavior comes. And this is I'm not doing justice to his language, but it's something like that, deep culture. So where I wanted to start you was with a contrast that he makes, and he's developed this in numerous settings over the past many years. And those of you who know Hawaii history, you'll recognize why these are such strong contrasts for him. So one of the deep cultures, and let's just point the finger at me as a white, aged male, he calls D-I-E, die, the die deep culture, with the D for domination, the I for individualism, and the E for exclusion. Every one of those words, I know in my bones what they are. I also know, you know, how painfully those things are playing out in this day and age. How those things are massively destructive. They have brought great benefits. They have brought many great things in the world, but I'm not going to focus on those. I'm just focused on, at the moment, the damage. The contrast that he draws upon from Native Hawaiian culture, he calls ola. Ola is a Native Hawaiian word which means to heal. And the words he attaches to each of those letters, O, comes from olu olu, which means compatibility, comforting, respectful, acceptance of differences, as being part of the deep culture of Hawaii. The L comes from lokahi, which is a we rather than an I, a consciousness of the needs of the larger group of the commons. And A is the familiar aloha. But as we go on further, I'll allude to some sort of deeper interpretations of aloha than the ones most people know. So here he is. He's got domination, individualism, exclusion, and you can see it in the military presence in Hawaii. You can see it in the tourist presence in Hawaii. You can see it in the economic presence in Hawaii. You can see it in the condominiums of Hawaii. Just manifest. And on the other hand, you have this culture that is a we culture, not an I culture. It's one that seeks to bridge differences when they exist, done with a deep, deep spirit of aloha. So this is a contrast that he sets up. And he does it without blame. He does it without pointing of fingers. He does it from the point of view of understanding. Can I, Gordon, can you feel both sides? Can you feel the DIE? And can you feel the OLA? So it's a question, it's a quest. Whether you're Native Hawaiian or not, all six of those exist in us. Another time we can talk about, in Buddhism, there's the six, I forget the Japanese word for them, but sort of the six hungry ghosts, or the six, Gene, do you remember what I'm talking about?
Levels of consciousness from hell to heaven.
No.
Perfections.
The six realms.
What's that?
Realms.
The six realms.
Yes, that's it. The six realms.
Thanks, Lillian.
And how we cycle through those. That isn't just like a state of being. For 1 year I'm like this, and 1 year I'm like this. It's each of us every day goes through that cycle of the six realms. And this, similarly, these things from Polka, I can feel how we cycle through those. The worst of it is not that we have those. It's there's many ways in which, as I say, individualism is just hot wired into my very fabric. I expect I'll die with that still intact. The damage from that, though, comes not from having it, it comes from not knowing that I have it. As with so many things, the things that you can see, that you can describe, articulate, lose their power. It's the things that you don't know maintain their power over you. So what else about Polka? He, well, I guess as I sort of round out this circle of individuals I'm talking about, you'll realize that Polka has connections, deep connections to Tanoi Roshi, who I'll talk about, Numen Shim Roshi, who I'll talk about, and Pilahi Paki, who I'll talk about. I just wondering if there's anything else about Polka. Bethany almost had a chance to meet him, but we were late completing a hike, and by the time we got to his house, he had to go elsewhere for a meeting, so she didn't get that chance. But I'm committed to making it opportunities for people to spend time with him. Outside his house, he's got this big mango tree, and so when he has guests, you just sort of pull up the assortment of chairs that exist and sort of tuck yourself in under the mango tree, and things unfold. The conversations with him are sort of never ending. But joining us on that hike throughout the week was a younger guy, Numen Shim, is sort of the westernized name he goes by most commonly. And Newman is someone I've known for, it has to be at least 30 years through my training in Hawaii. And among other things, what's interesting about Newman is that he carries sort of three spiritual lineages. And it's an unusual combination in that he received his Inca, his Roshi title from Taiken Yokoyama Roshi, who was the successor to Tanoi Roshi. And Newman and I spent time both living at Chozenji at various points in our lives. And so Newman knows Zen training the way any of us know Zen training. The same emphasis on breath and posture, the same emphasis on martial arts, fine arts. But here's many years ago, as I was starting to become hungrier as a teacher, and I wanted to create, meaningful training opportunities for people, not just coming to class once or twice a week, not just coming to sesshin. And so we set up this 3-week program in Hawaii, full-time live-in program. We did it 2 summers in a row that I recall. People came from Israel, people came from the United States. And one of the highlights was going down for several days, going down to this area I'm calling Waianae, which is sort of to the southwestern coast of Oahu. It's an area that's very, very heavily populated by Native Hawaiians. It's not the lush Hawaii that the tourists love, so it's relatively untouched. It's sort of like they got the leftovers, they got the places that people didn't really want to go to. It was a little bit too extreme, really harsh, dry climate. And so we went down there, and Newman, we spent time working with some Native Hawaiians on repairing some taro fields was the work task, and then we would do early morning zazen, evening zazen, okyo, and things like that. But Newman, among other things, was the coach for a six-person outrigger canoe club, of which there are many. That's so paddling a six-person canoe is as common an activity for, kids there, adults there, as would be, touch football, baseball in the park. I saw some kids there was one who was about no more than 6 years old, struggling with this massive paddle, but valiantly out there in a canoe. So anyway, this time when we were down there, and Newman was able to put all of us into, I guess we had at least 2 canoes, if not more, and we went out on a very long paddle. And so we're doing, we think we know what we're doing with a paddle, some on this side, some on the right side. There's a signal, and you shift. Going along, it's like, okay, this is a beautiful day. It's nice to be out in the water, but not that revolutionary until it was. The experience was one of, this won't make sense, but it's as if the canoe itself was in samadhi, that deep, non-dualistic, mind-body disappears state. And so there's water, there's a boat, there's paddles, there's individuals, but there's no distinctions amongst any of us. And it's as if none of us had anything to do with the boat's motion. It just was roaring across the water. I've never had an experience like that. And I thought afterwards, my God, think of all the hundreds of hours we spend in Hojo training trying to create that sensation of no distinctions. And here it was available to us, none of us familiar with a 6-man outrigger canoe. We all had some, paddling experience to some degree, but no preparation. So it's as if the water, the waves, the canoe, it gave that to us. And so that's kind of what Newman represents to me, is giving to us something so familiar from our Zen training, but coming at us from a completely different place than one we might expect. And if you've read, I know we've mentioned this book that Newman and I recently put together called Kekua's Daughter, and Newman wrote the afterword talking about his experiences training in Zen, but also his experiences with Hawaiian spirituality. And out of that comes this phrase for him called Manawa Zen. That's what he wants to call his style of Zen teaching, Zen training. And so he's creating an organization and developing some dojos in Hawaii for Manawa Zen. And again, Manawa, spiritual mountain, I've talked about it in different places before. Newman talks about it in this book. We can come back to that later if there's questions. But what Manawa Zen means is just this interwoven training in sort of the, let's call it the deep culture of Zen and the deep culture of Hawaii. Well, and I've jumped ahead of myself because I said he carried 3 lineages. So I mentioned his Zen lineage. His family ties, he is Hawaiian genealogy. Man, this is like an Olympic sporting event, the sophistication with which they approach genealogy. Serious business. So one of the lineages for him is through family ties that goes back to kahuna. Is a hard word to translate, but it's like a spiritual elder of Native Hawaiian. And I'm sort of resisting that there isn't like a Hawaiian religion. And even saying Hawaiian spirituality, I'm saying the same thing as Hawaiian culture. They don't separate out religion from every day. They don't separate out culture from religion. And these were he knows of their activity at the time of Kamehameha the First, and you may or may not know that name, but he is the Hawaiian chief who was credited with unifying the Hawaiian Islands. That the Hawaiian Islands, there's many islands, each had their own rulers, and Kamehameha was the person who put it together. And he did it violently. It was done with bloodshed. This is kind of like very late 1700s, very early 1800s. So not that distant in time in terms of people's memories. But what's known from some of the writings from these kahuna in Newman's family was that they lost the argument, that they said you don't need battles to unify the islands. You can use aloha. That'll do the same thing without death and destruction. But for numerous reasons, the warrior faction won out, and so the battles took place. But that's still a that's still part of him that he draws upon. So I was going to read his description of aloha, which we can come at from another direction when we get to Palahi. But he said, so you'll recognize these names. I'm just going to read these 2 paragraphs. He says, Anti-Palahi left many definitions of aloha, and Tanoa Roshi himself liked best the one you'll find in this essay, and we'll come back to that one. But there's also a saying, the way they speak of is not the way. Similarly, the aloha they speak of is not the true aloha. Why? Because with true aloha, in its deepest sense, there is 1 or 0, not 2. In other words, I become you so much, there's not even the slightest residue of my own self-existence. With true aloha, both are 1 completely. Both are unknown. Both are 0. Both are empty. and there is no intention, no wanting something in return for giving. While this truth is absolute, aloha, once fully realized in its deepest sense, can be expressed in every action, from flushing the toilet to cooking to sharing conversations. And at the same time, it exists in the sound of the syllables, and we'll come to that. Notwithstanding, being the sound from an absolute sense is different from hearing the sound superficially. So that's the first time I've seen a Zen definition of aloha. And to the degree you've been around any other talks from folks in our crowd, you know the phrase to become one with, a translation of a Japanese phrase that is meant to be sort of a guiding principle, especially for anyone training as a priest, that's sort of an absolute expectation of anybody training as an end priest, the ability to become one with. So you have it from the aloha side, you got it from the Zen side. Time check. So that leads me to Pilahipaki, who was a Native Hawaiian woman who I know little. She's also passed away. She died, I think, in 1985. So I never met her. Newman himself never met her, although actually that was the third lineage that Newman shares, is that he has blood ties to Pilahipaki through his father. So that is, I guess that when I said here, there's sort of three spiritual lineages in him. They're that. But this woman, Pilahipaki, has a great deal of significance for us in our own Zen training, in the sense that sort of the deepest elements of Hawaiian spirituality, they're not like cultivated in a dojo. It's not like you go to become, adept somewhere in Hawaiian spirituality. It's a much more mysterious process by which it curls and folds in and appears and disappears and comes into people's lives. So as you read in Kekua's daughter, she was working at the local telephone company, but kept hearing a voice saying, come, to maybe Kailua Kona over on the Big Island. And sort of the way she grew up, that was not a voice to be ignored. She didn't know who was speaking or why they were speaking, but there was this, come. And she did, and met a magnificent 105, maybe 106-year-old Native Hawaiian man who was dying, and how she actually found him in Kona, I have no idea. But in that encounter, there was a transmission that took place like that, of the full depth of Hawaiian spirituality. It was just like, the description is, it was like a lightning bolt. And with great luck, the picture of this man is in this book, and the photograph that we have of him, black and white, is taken by no less than Ansel Adams. He was commissioned back in the late 50s to go to Hawaii to take a number of portraits of ordinary people. Here he is, this guy. So It's a face worth knowing. So here's Pilahi. And before this encounter, she would have been raised around the Hawaiian language, but couldn't speak it. And now she could. And what she then devoted her life to was kind of unfolding the power of the Hawaiian language. And not as a teacher of how to speak Hawaiian. It's more like what's the layers that lie beneath and within the words. So I guess the phrase I wrote down here was sort of the spirituality of the spoken Hawaiian language. And you'll find the cross currents that tie to us. One of them is that the language is built on rhythm and sound, which is different than saying the language is built on the need to communicate, the need to convey meaning. That was the least of significance to the Hawaiian language. And she would describe, and this is generally acknowledged, that there were at least 3 layers to the Hawaiian language. But actually, before I do that, the other element is that there was this palpable sense that you've actually heard from me before, is that words have weight. There's a physicality to the spoken word that delivers the impact you experience from that. And a story that's told is a father, Native Hawaiian father, young daughters, 2 young daughters. He takes them out to a patch of weeds. Around here, it would be like raspberry bramble, which is just painful stuff to encounter because that's the way it grows, and the thorns on the branches. You don't mess around with raspberry bramble. And he brought with him a bag of chicken feathers, which he then, when they arrived there, he sort of shook out these feathers, and they scatter in the wind throughout the raspberry patch. And he tells his daughters, you know what? Today, what I need you to do is go collect all of those feathers, which reduced them to tears because they've been around these kinds of brambles, and they know there's, for one thing, it's an impossible task, but also they're going to get hurt in the process. And again, the way the story's told is that he then relented and said, well, what I want you to know is that words are like these chicken feathers. And once they're released, they cannot be collected. That's when we say the words have weight, it's with that kind of feeling. So these 3 layers. The first is called ho'opukaku, which is sort of the literal meaning. I'm going to the store. The dog needs to be fed. Things that need to be accomplished. So that's that level of the level, and that's so you go to the university and you study Hawaiian language. That's That's the language you will be learning at that level. But then there's another example, another layer called kaona, which is much more delightfully indirect, poetic, drawing upon nature. And I found I've got a whole collection of these. There's a wonderful book of these collected between like 1910 and 1960 by a particular woman who was fascinated by these expressions. And the one I wrote down. Let me see if I got that here. Yeah, and the language comes slowly for me. Ke kololio ka hao aoka kamai kanai aala oke kiele. When the dew-laden breeze of the upland creeps swiftly down, it brings with it the fragrance of the gardenias. That's what those words said. But it's used when you meet someone who has brought you good news or something happy. So rather than saying, wow, I'm really happy to hear that, or that's so cool that what just happened, instead there would be this long, melodious phrase of rhythm and sound that conveys a sensation, a scent. Gardenias is one of my favorite flowers, so that's one reason why I picked this one out. Just by smelling a gardenia, I'm happy, right? So that's the level of kaona, use of the language. But then there's one more layer underneath that. And what was very unusual is that it's thought that before Pīlāki, there were not people who were willing to talk about this level of the language in public. It was thought to be not suitable for the untrained ear. But to her, it was like, no, this is, if we can't do this, what's the point? So this layer is called no ahuna. And the word she attached to that was, this was the elemental use of the language. So some of you had experience during Keishin where we were doing sort of our usual vowel sound practice. And you know how significant that is on many levels when we are developing our okyo practice, our chanting practice. But not only that, you're developing the ability to both generate and sense vibration in your body. You know, we lay on our back, hands resting below our belly button, and just repeated long yeah, trying to feel into each one of those vowels of vibration in our body, right? But we kind of leave it at that. We kind of leave it at the level of vibration. And then as we encounter others, the ability to generate resonance. As my vibration synchronizes with your vibration, we create something greater than both of us. And we've started to hear that here in the dojo during some of our recent sesshin, where the okyo is starting to develop this quality that there's overtones. So there's sounds you can hear that are not coming out of any one person's mouth. It's just the phenomena of overtones when resonance starts to work. Okay, so that's terrific stuff for us. But as I say, in for Hawaiian language, it goes further than that. They add English language is not the right thing, but they have meaning to this stuff. So let me get to this. Let me get to the vowels. So A, I've sort of forgotten how we do this in English language. The vowels in English, we say what? No, A, E, I, O, U, right? I think that's what we do in English. I'm corrupted by my, I've sort of forgotten how to do this. So it's for me, it's A, E, O, U. Not just, it's pointing to spiritual light, elemental fire, the sun, the source of energy. So it doesn't mean that. And when I say it's pointing to that, it's like it's meant to embody that, to be that, to use the sound is to become elemental light. Okay? For A, it's movement, rhythm, represented by the wind. So again, pointing to that, but also becoming that. So the sun, A, the wind, E, emotion, elemental waters, both salt and fresh water. In Hawaii, you're surrounded by salt water, but you need the fresh water to live. You need both to live. So that's the elemental element of E. O is the spiritual foundation, substance, the earth. U is this is less obvious, but it's spiritual humanity. But it can be used creatively to give either a positive or a negative meaning to the other creative elements. So you can combine U with and depending on the context, you can shape it in a positive direction, a healing direction, or you can shape it in a dangerous, damaging direction. And I'm saying this literally. For them, as I say, the words have weight. So the words can be used, the sounds can be used creatively and destructively, depending on the situation, depending on what's needed. Beyond that, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's only 7 other letters, consonants in the Hawaiian language. K, H, L, M, N, P, and W. That's it. So they've got those 7 plus the 5 vowels, 12 letters, the way we use letters. But out of that, they have created this phenomenally rich, expressive language. And there's many elements to it. As you see the letters. I mean, one reason I'm struggling with pronouncing the phrase that I gave you about the gardenias is that there's the inflections and the stopping points. So you can have, 3 letters lined up, but you can create different meanings depending on where you inflect and where you insert a stop before you carry on to the other letters in that one word. That's part of it. So let's see, where I didn't make a note onto this, but let me find it. Where Pelahi became most publicly known was that when she felt that the use of aloha in Hawaii had become really painfully trivialized, and it became simply a marketing device, the land of aloha. And so she went back again to the elements of the language, the A, the L, the O, the H, and the A, and was teaching from those elements what is the meaning of aloha. And she did this so well that this came into legislation for the state of Hawaii in terms of how the state would have to conduct its business. And this was done primarily by Newman's father, who was also a lawyer, Alvin Shim. And actually, Alvin is the person who introduced me to the writings of Pilahi Paki. So for her, you'll see this in a couple different forms, but the one you probably have not seen is what she did. So for her, the Ah is spiritual light, embodying that light. And the Lo, the Lo, is the foundation. And it doesn't refer to people. It just refers to what underlies everything. And we can find all kinds of Zen words that point to that same elemental everything. And then Ha is like the ability to introspect and to feel this. And whether you're animate object, inanimate object, how well does this elemental, foundational energy, spirit inhabit the world you're part of? So that's sort of that's like a koan, right? That's not easily translated into behavior. So you can't look at something and say, is that over there? Does that represent aloha? Is that aloha what just happened? You can't pull it apart that way. It has to be inhabited. So shifting just for a moment, this word inhabiting is part of what I'm searching for these days when I think about helping people become more exposed to this way of speaking, this way of being. And it's not going to come sort of necessarily in one place or in one teaching method. It becomes something you inhabit, and it starts to soak in. Very different from the way we portray a Zen training based on, breath and posture and concentration. Those each have behavioral elements that we can cultivate and refine and foster and place into settings. You can't do that with aloha. And yet they're grounded They're grounded, as you'll hear when I talk about Tenoroshi, in the same damn place. So going back to where I started when I said that, I was familiar with this concept of assault on duality as being in the nature of Zen training. This represents the healing of duality, right? That man with diabetes, the healing, his diabetes is maybe too far gone to restore any of the nerve sensation. So now it becomes a more sophisticated task. The healing he seeks is to feel the land that he stands on, to feel the ground he stands on. That would be healing in that context. And there's no magic bullet that's going to do that. It's going to have to be a way of being he inhabits, another set of channels by which ground once again becomes palpable for him. I appreciate the fact you guys are hanging in with me. This is we're exploring new terrain here for me. This is kind of a first crack at the significance of these things for me. That you start to know who is Poka La'inui. You start to know who is Numen Shem. You start to know who is Pilahi Paki. But the fourth person, for most of you, doesn't need introduction. He's our founder for Chosei Zen, Tanoi Roshi. And he's the hub for all of this. That he trained Numen. Numen lived with him, trained with him for many years. Deep, deep friendship with Poka La'inui. To see the two of them sitting out on the porch in the evening talking was just one of the more delightful, memorable scenes. One from the world of Zen, one from the world of, Hawaiian sovereignty, the UN, indigenous peoples, but just one person, two bodies. And his relationship to Pilahi, and again, the story is recounted in Keikoa's daughter, but he went through an experience, something like, I want to honor our guy. I don't easily remember his name, but let me get back to the name of our guy, this 105-year-old man. He deserves to be known. Naluahine Ka'opua was the man who did the lightning bolt for Pilahi Paki. Okay. So Pilahi, and this is before my time, so I'm only hearing this second, third, fourth hand. Alvin Shim, Numen's father, brought her up to the dojo to meet Tenoroshi. And she was quite elderly, quite ill. And in their encounter, Tenoroshi sort of immediately recognized is that she couldn't die yet because she carried a burden. She carried the burden of this teaching that had been given to her and that she had not been able to transmit. And without transmitting it, it was as if she simply would not let herself die. My life cannot end. And again, it was in an instant, unspoken, that he took that from her. And once again, like her, before he couldn't speak Hawaiian language, and now he could. He took. He said, I'm not the one who can teach this. I'm not Native Hawaiian. He was Japanese American. He says, I'm not Native Hawaiian, so I'm not the person to carry this on, but I can hold it until the next person comes along. And both from Polka and Newman, they're saying that's still true today. It has not been passed on yet. But there's something in Tanori Roshi's ability, though dead for decades now. When the time is right, when the person appears, it will once again be passed on. This essence that has gone down through the centuries. So, as I recounted several months ago when I was doing the Keisho, with me, he didn't overtly teach me what he knew about such things. But it was very much an indirect teaching. He kept putting me in situations where I was inhabiting, in the way that I used that word earlier. And I thought that was just sort of a sideline. That was just interesting. I loved it, but it's like it had nothing to do with me. And I now recognize how profoundly he was teaching me. And this notion, it resolved this duality of, do you assault duality or do you heal duality? It's like, yes. Yes. You assault it, you heal it. You assault it, you heal it. There's no difference other than in the words that I'm speaking. So we all know of him as the martial arts that came through him. And there's one new book that's just come out, that's just up on the bookstore, called 5 Lessons, or is it 5 Lessons on Zen Training, which is some edited transcripts of his teaching from 40 years ago. And the first lesson is this long chapter that talks a lot about how he taught through the martial arts. So we know that as a foundational element of Chosei Zen. But there was a phrase he used often that I didn't really understand until now, where he would say something like, I can train you with kendo, being the sword form of a martial art. I can train you with kendo, or I can train you in kendo. And what I now realize is that he trained me quite wonderfully with kendo, meaning it was a means to an end. It wasn't something that was going to become something that I could take all the way to the end point where it becomes transcendent enlightenment through use of a sword. Some people that's possible, not me. So the with kendo had a tremendous influence on me in terms of all kinds of things that I won't get into now. But he really was teaching me through that ola that I spoke of earlier, the olu olu, the lokahi, the aloha. Although he himself would never say those words. Now, again, where this connects to us, and he said this quite explicitly to Newman, because with Newman, he would teach him much more overtly about Hawaiian culture, and he would speak to him in Hawaiian. And the 2 parts that Newman wrote down, which are significant to us, is that this is quoting Tanori Roshi, is the essence of Hawaiian culture is to know what cannot be known. And I find that quite quite wonderful. Quite wonderful. And I'll touch on that in a minute. Then he also said the essence of Zen and the culture of Hawaii are the same. The essence of Zen and the culture of Hawaii are the same. And I've heard this, read this before, and I treated it as if it was just sort of politeness. You know, something you might say to someone, you come from a different world than me, but in reality, you and I are not so different. But to the students of you, or no, to the students of me, it's like I'm really talking about something over here. Really, what I want you to do is listen to me. What now strikes me is he's just saying, no, it's the same thing. And the phrase that Newman wrote down, he says, you can call it maguro or ahi, where maguro is the Japanese word for tuna, and ahi is the Hawaiian word for tuna. Or you can call it sashimi, which you know is a Japanese word, or you can call it poke, which is a Hawaiian word for the same thing. So that's what drove me to go to Hawaii this time, is to say, okay, if these things are fundamentally true, if the essence of a Hawaiian culture or the essence of Zen and the culture of Hawaii are the same, why wouldn't I want the opportunity for my students to experience those elements of Hawaiian culture that have meant so much to me? So that's the kind of thing where you say, stay tuned to what becomes possible with that. But that's why we're thinking about this Newman's phrase, Manawa Zen, is incorporating these two elements. So I've got a few minutes left, and I've got more I can talk about, but I can pause and say, are there questions? What's coming to you at the moment? Yeah, yeah, yeah. You could feel it. You could feel it, and it's one of those things. It's always been there. It's like we've always known this, but we didn't so readily acknowledge it. It was sort of a sideshow. It was like, it's nice that our Zen training takes place in Hawaii. It was kind of a common way it would be said. Now, so that's the good news, is there's now sort of this whole other realm that we can explore and use in our training. That's the good news. The bad news is that, like, I live in the United States. I live in the mainland United States. I live in that DIE culture all day, every day. I don't live in a Hawaiian culture. So just as Zen changed when it landed in Hawaii with Tanoi Roshi, Zen will change as it lands here. Mainland United States, Europe, South America, other places where we have elements of that Hawaiian culture alive and well, but not by no means a dominant force. So this idea of healing duality, I take as life's work. And how we do that in the arenas in which we live, we breathe is not at all trivial. But at least Hawaii can be a touchstone. You go spend time with Newman. You go out in a outrigger canoe. You do zazen on a beach at 6 a.m, looking out at an ocean that stretches, 5,000 miles until you hit the next land. That does something to you. It reminds something in you. Anybody else? Something to ask or say at the moment? Well, let me just touch then a little bit further on this phrase, to know the unknown. That's our linking, that's our bridge between this world of Zen and this world of Hawaiian culture. To know the unknown. One of the delights for me as I train and as I age, how more and more of me drops away. And as more and more of me drops away, how incredibly, wonderfully the senses come alive. Right? I can feel in my body how when senses are working full blast, there's not a lot of barrier, right? That the degree I'm full of thoughts, senses are shut down. And certainly there was much of my earlier life that was like that. The world is in my head, not in my nose and my fingers and my ears. So that's one thing as things fall away. But what I hadn't really been able to, I'm doing this with my fingers, I'm saying to feel into, is that the world beyond that rich sensory environment, bad word, this rich sensory existence, is the world where just simply you just don't know. And the reason you don't know is because it's not because you're ignorant, is because there's nothing capable of knowing. So it's not a problem. Just not knowing. That's what unfolds as this piece of crust falls off and this embedded chunk over here falls away. And this thing kind of slides to the ground in a slow drip, right? As you experience yourself in that way, nothing here, nothing here, nothing here. It's not just the senses. It's that unknowing. And with more time, I would take this into maybe another time, sort of I've started looking into this. This is taking me back to the Japanese word kan, which was a favorite word that Tenori Roshi would teach with. And you can translate it as intuition, but it's not an intuition based inside of me. It's not my intuition. It is just simply an existence in a world where there's not a whole lot of me. And I'm reading, some of you might even have this. I'm reading this through very fresh eyes and would like to come back to that. But then also I'll leave you with a parting image from my last morning in Hawaii. We were lucky enough to have a hotel right by the beach. And I went down to the water before breakfast and just was floating on my back, floating on my back. And instead of it being the usual sunny sky, blue sky, gorgeous, 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 it was overcast with these wonderful layers of clouds of different colors and textures and shapes. And it struck me how clouds have a bad rap, right? That clouds block us from the sun. So there's lots of language that Jimmy, your thinking is cloudy, right? That would not be a thing to aspire to have cloudy thinking. It blocks us from the spec. It's like you're flying on a plane, right? We've all done this where we could take off on a rainy day, and slowly as you come up, you break through the cloud layer and you break through into the blue, right? And we think somehow, that's it. I had to get through this cloudy crap to get there. But there I was lying on my back in the water, and I'm thinking, oh, you know what? Those clouds, that's where it's at. That's the world to live in. I mean, yeah, it's nice that there's a clear sky and it's nice there's a sun. But the ability to live in the midst of clouds, nothing to hold on to, nothing to name, nothing that stays the same. You know this, right? You can look at the sky for 5 minutes with clouds, and they simply they can't stay the way they were. So now for me, to know the unknown is to live in the clouds. And it's interesting because the phrase that came to me as I was lying there was, I don't know where it comes from in me, but the phrase that came was the cloud of unknowing. And so I Googled that, and that phrase is, I mean, I didn't invent that phrase. There's a long Christian mystic tradition, and there's a medieval manuscript that probably is English language, but I didn't get that far, called the cloud of unknowing. So this, it's like you can call it maguro, you can call it ahi, you can call it sashimi, you can call it poke. In our training, there's no end to the pathways that need exploring, that need developing, that need cultivation. But to me, where they all lead is that healing of duality.